Hello everyone, a warm welcome to Pakistan Dreaming. Myself Meera R. Nair, and today we are going to see Salesforce asynchronous execution approaches that is also based on whether it is low code, pro code or hybrid. Thank you so much our sponsors and organizers for making this event a grand success. A little about myself, I am currently working as a solution architect at UST. I am two times Salesforce MVP and also currently leading Trivandrum Architect Community Group. I am 20 times Salesforce certified and I have around 14 plus years of experience in Salesforce ecosystem. This is our agenda for today. We are going to see what is a transaction in Salesforce and what is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous mode of execution, and where we will be able to utilize asynchronous execution. Then we are going to see different asynchronous execution approaches in Salesforce and the considerations. We are going to see a real-time use case of where we can use asynchronous execution and its implementation details, followed by the advantages of asynchronous execution. So what's a transaction in Salesforce? Whenever a record is getting updated in Salesforce, it can be an insertion, delete operation or update operation. At the backend, a series of operations will be happening. It can be validation rules, flows, workflows, process builders, or trigger execution, or integration to external system. And this might be getting executed sequentially also. So all these related operations together form a particular transaction. But what is a synchronous mode of execution? When a transaction is getting started, that is, someone is trying to create a new account, at that moment, we might need to execute some additional operations. For example, I wanted to create a default contact, which is action 1, then that is followed by a task creation and probably an email notification also to the account owner. So all these are different actions which is part of the same account create operation. And in this diagram, you can see that the flow is like the transaction is calling the first action. Once that particular action is getting completed, the transaction again calls the second one. Once that is completed, it is calling the third operation. Meaning all the operations are getting executed synchronously or serially. It is called synchronous execution. So what is asynchronous mode of execution? Here you can see when the first action is getting completed, it is calling the second operation. For example, if the first one is contact creation, after contact creation, the transaction is calling the task creation. But it is not going to wait for the second action completion. Before that itself, it's going to call the third operation. Meaning the second action is going to get executed in a separate mode or separate thread. And the current transaction does not have any dependency with the completion of this action 2. So this type of execution where we can have independent transactions or independent operations getting executed parallelly, it is called asynchronous mode of execution. So when to use asynchronous mode? There are a couple of situations or scenarios when we might need to use asynchronous mode of execution. One of that is performance, like when you want to execute a very long running process which involves lots of complex logic, if you are adding that process as part of your current transaction, the current transaction completion time is going to get increased. For example, when you are creating an account, if there are having too many operations at the backend, you might be seeing that the contact save operation is taking more time. That is one of the scenario. You can have the backend processes getting executed in a separate thread. The other scenario, governor limits, like if your environment is having too many processes as part of a particular transaction, there are higher chances that you might be hitting governor limits. So when you are executing some of those operations in a separate transaction asynchronously, you are going to get a separate set of governor limits. Thus, you will be safe. Other scenario is integration. You want to send some information to an external system from a trigger context. In that scenario, as per the Salesforce implementation, the only option is to call an add feature method from which then you can call the external system. The other situation is that if you want to avoid mixed DML exception. For example, if you have got a partner user in the system, when you're updating something on the partner user, you want to make sure that the related partner contact is also getting updated. In that case, Salesforce is having a limitation that you cannot update both setup and non-setup objects together. For example, contact is a non-setup object and user is a setup object. To avoid mixed DML exception, which is going to happen in that case, what you need to do is execute one of the operation asynchronously. For example, when the user is getting updated from the user trigger, you can have an asynchronous execution using add feature or using some other mechanism. Then this contact update can happen in that separate thread. So this is going to avoid mixed DML exception. Next is recursive execution. That is when you have a parent-child update happening. When a parent is getting updated, you are creating or updating a child record that intends again update the parent. And if you are getting into a cyclic kind of operation, to avoid this kind of recursive execution, you can also use asynchronous mode. Now let us see what are the different asynchronous execution approaches from a high level. And Salesforce is providing various approaches or multiple mechanisms by which you will be able to execute operations asynchronously. And you won't believe, here I have actually documented 10 different approaches and there are many more. But let us first concentrate on this first 10 approaches. The first approach, again I have ordered this based on whether it is low code, hybrid or pro code. When you say low code, you don't need to write any kind of Apex logic or Lightning component to achieve that. You will be able to implement that using flows. So the first approach is flow scheduler. This is a low code approach. And some of the considerations or advantages with this approach is that the implementation and maintenance effort is less, but you will be able to schedule only one time or daily or weekly. So there are some restrictions on how many times this particular flow scheduler can get executed. But this can be used for bulk record processing. As you all know, flows has lots of limitations when it is coming to very complex operations. So better to avoid flows when your logic is going to be really complex. Now coming to the second approach, a flow with async path. This is a low code approach again, and similar to the previous approach, here also the implementation and maintenance effort is less. And this is similar to a trigger which is calling a future or queuable action. And the other advantage is that if operation is updating some values on the screen, updates are visible on the screen almost near real time. But again, this is flow, so this may not be suitable for very complex operations. The third option is platform event with flow subscription. I hope you all are familiar with platform event. It is basically similar to an object, but it is helping Salesforce to provide a publish subscribe mechanism by which external systems and also internal mechanisms can subscribe to a particular platform event, and platform events are getting fired based on a specific operation. This is again low code approach. When you're having some updates happening, you can fire a platform event, and this platform event can be internally subscribed, which is going to be asynchronous operation through flow or Apex. But here we are considering the flow subscription approach. So this is completely low code. You don't need to write any logic. The implementation and maintenance effort is less, but what you need to take care is that there are some limitations associated with platform events. The details you can see here. So you need to be very careful on all the limitations of platform events before deciding this as the solution. Next is flow with async Apex action. Again, flow solution, but from that you are going to call an Apex action, which is again future, like this is getting implemented through a future method. This is a hybrid approach because we are calling the apex action from a flow. It's a mix of low code and code approach. The implementation and maintenance effort is average, and the advantage here is that since there are some limitations with flow that you cannot handle very complex operation, using an apex action you will be able to move your complex logic to apex methods. But again, like I mentioned, this is consuming the future approach, so you need to be careful about the future limits. Fifth approach is on change data capture with asynchronous trigger. Change data capture is very similar to platform events, but the difference is that platform events you will be able to define by yourself, but change data capture is a feature you will be able to enable from the setup. And once you enable change data capture, system or Salesforce is going to automatically fire a change data capture event based on whenever the record is getting created, updated or deleted. And again, this is a hybrid approach, meaning the change data capture firing is by default. You don't need to do anything for that, but the subscription to that is through only trigger. So there you need to do coding. And implementation and maintenance effort is average here also, and you also need to refer the change data capture limitations. If you need to enable CDC on large number of objects, you need to get an add-on license, and it is going to hold all kind of records, like any kind of insert, update or delete is going to get tracked as part of change event, and you need to have additional filters to get your own criteria records. Now, the sixth approach is platform event with trigger subscription. We have seen platform event with flow subscription as the third option. Now, this is very similar, but here we are going to subscribe to platform event using a trigger. Again, this is a hybrid approach. The implementation and maintenance effort is average, but this is more flexible compared to CDC because we will be able to define our criteria and what all fields needs to be referenced or reflected when a record change is getting updated. The seventh option is trigger with future method. This is a pro code approach because it involves complete coding. The implementation and maintenance effort is high here, but this can be used for very complex implementation. The one disadvantage here is that when you use future, you cannot have chained asynchronous execution happening, but that can be implemented, that is chaining of complex asynchronous operations can be executed using queuable approach. So that is the eighth approach, which is almost similar to future method, but there are so many additional advantages for queuable method compared to future. Those details you can see here. You will be able to chain queuable operations. You can have more control on how this is getting executed through transaction finalizers. And ninth option is batch apex. So similar to the scheduled flows, you can have code in place which is going to process large number of records based on the scheduler or schedule time. And apex scheduler can be used to schedule this batch apex operations. Now, we have seen the different options from a high level. Now let us see a real use case. The scenario is that when you have account and contact records in the system, account is having a pick list called active, which is having values yes and no. Similarly, contact is also having a similar pick list with values yes and no. Our requirement is that whenever the parent account's active field value is becoming no, the child contact's active value also should become no. That is our requirement. So if you want to see that in action, I can show you what we are expecting. So let me create a new account, which is demo account, and you can see there is an active pick list which we are talking about. So let us keep the value as yes and let us save this. So we have a demo account created. Now let us create a new contact. Let us populate some dummy values. test contact, and again this is the pick list value we are referring, so let us keep it as yes, and let us put a dummy email also. Now let us save this. So now you can see the account status is active and contact also should be active. So let us open the contact also in a new window and let us check the status. You can see it is also active. Now I am going to modify the account status as no. Now my requirement is that when this is happening, the related contact status also should become no. You can see it was yes. Let me refresh and see if that is happening. Yes, you can see the contact also got deactivated. So this is what we need to implement. And now we are going to see all the different approaches of implementing this requirement in asynchronous mode. For that, this is my own blog post on this particular topic. So you can see all the details, the same details I mentioned here, and the implementation use case. And first approach what we are going to see here is a flow scheduler. So flow scheduler, like you all know, it is going to get executed on a specific time. Since it is getting executed on a specific time, there should be a mechanism for us to understand which all records to be processed. For that, we have basically created a field that is going to capture if the account status got inactivated. So the checkbox name is update contact, and we also have a flow in place which is going to populate this particular checkbox. So you can see, let us check the criteria first. So there should be a record triggered criteria, and this is a fast field update. That means the flow is going to get executed in before operation. And here I got a criteria like whenever the account is getting updated, I am checking if the active status got updated and its current value is no. At that moment, I am going to execute a fast field update path. And in that fast field path, what I am going to do is I am going to update the checkbox value, that is the update contacts checkbox, as true. That is our first step, and that is our first flow. Now, how the scheduled flow is going to work? Now, I hope you all know how to create a scheduled flow. When you go to new flow, you will be getting an option to create scheduled triggered flow. This is how you will be creating scheduled triggered flow. I have the flow already created here. You can see this is going to get executed daily at a particular time frame. And what it is going to do is, there are conditions mentioned on the record pickup criteria. Basically, if active value on the account is no, and if the checkbox that we are updating when the status is getting deactivated, so if that checkbox value is also true, that is the time we are going to fetch all the child contacts where the status is active, and we are going to update the child contact status as no. This is how the scheduled flows are going to work. And if you go to the setup under scheduled jobs, you should be able to see this scheduled flow getting executed. You can see it's already there, scheduled flow. That was our first approach. Now let us see the second approach. Second approach is flow with an asynchronous path. This is similar to what we have seen on the scheduled flow. So here the criteria and everything is same whenever an account is getting updated, and if the active status has become no, at that moment the difference is that we are going to add an asynchronous path. You can see run asynchronously, and in under update contacts it's doing the same. It's going to fetch all the contacts corresponding to the current account, and we are going to make the active value as no for all those contacts. So here what is going to happen when the account is getting updated, when the criteria is getting satisfied, this is going to be a separate transaction altogether. That's how the schedule path is going to work. Now let us see what is the third option. Third option is platform event with flow subscription. So how it is working is, whenever the account is getting deactivated, we have a flow to publish platform event. So this is the record triggered flow on account. So this is going to check if the record active has got updated. If that is the case, it's going to publish an event. So publishing event is same as a record creation. So it is going to populate all the details like the name, is active value and everything. So that publish is happening here. Now we have another flow which is going to subscribe to this particular platform event. You can see when you go to flows, when you create a new flow, there is an option to subscribe to platform event. So that's how I created this particular flow, and you can see it's checking whenever we are getting a new platform event on account, we are checking if the record is active value is no. If it is no, we are going to get all the child records and update the value as inactive or no for the active status field. That's how this option is working. Now let us go to approach 4. Approach 4 is flow with asynchronous apex action. So again it is a flow option, but the difference is that instead of executing the logic within the flow, it is going to call an apex action. So let us see, so contact deactivation, this is the future method which is getting called from the flow. To the flow, it will be passing the account ID, and the class is going to fetch all the active contacts under that account, and it is going to update the contact status as no. This was the fourth option. Now fifth option is with change data capture. It is very similar to platform event, but the thing is that you don't need to fire it using a flow. By default, under the setup, when you enable change data capture for a particular object, automatically it is going to fire a change event. Then from our side, what we need to do is we need to subscribe to this particular change event, and you can do that only through Apex. A flow cannot subscribe to a CDC event. Now if I go to the implementation, you can see it is a trigger on account change event. That is a record which is getting created when you enable CDC on account object. And what it is doing, it's going to iterate over all the records in an after insert operation, and it is checking if the operation is an update and the change field is active. In that case, it's going to call a method within the contact deactivation class, that is this particular method, to perform the same operation. This is how the CDC option is working. Now sixth option is very similar, platform event with trigger subscription. We have seen how platform event can be subscribed from a flow. Similar to that, you will be able to subscribe it through trigger also. So this is the format, like this is how a platform event looks like. Always its extension will be __e. So here also we are going to iterate over all the records of platform event and check if the account or platform event status is no. If that's the case, it's again going to call the method to deactivate contacts. Now the seventh operation is trigger with future method. So we have an account trigger here. Within the account trigger, we are checking for all the conditions and we are adding it to an account IDs list. Then we have a check here if the list size or set size is greater than 0. If that is the case, it's going to call deactivate contact future, and remember the same method we call from the flow also. So even from apex trigger you can call the same future method and the contacts will be getting updated. This is one of the approach. Similarly, the next option is that instead of calling it in a future method, from the account trigger you are going to call a queuable method, and in the same class I have added the queuable method also. You can see all the details here, like it is basically called the same sync method. This is the next option. Like we mentioned, triggers with queuable, that's having more advantage compared to the future approach method, because you will be able to chain in multiple asynchronous operation using queuable approach. Now, what is the ninth option? It is the batch apex. So it is going to execute anonymously, and we can there are two approaches by which you will be able to execute a batch apex. That is execute anonymously, that is through developer console or through workbench. You can execute this batch apex, or you can execute it from a trigger, or you can execute it using a scheduler. So let us see the currently implemented batch apex. This is the batch apex. So what it is going to do is, we are going to query all the contacts where the parent account is inactive but the contact value, active value, is active. So in that case, we are going to get all those contacts and we are going to put the active value as no. Inactive means it is no. This is how the batch apex is getting executed. And you, like I mentioned, even we can execute this from a scheduler. So what you need to do is just create a class which implements the schedulable interface, and then execute within the execute instantiate the batch apex process. This is the last approach that we are going to discuss. Now we have seen all the different approaches of asynchronous execution that we described. We have seen the implementation details. We are going to see the sum of the advantages of utilizing asynchronous mode of execution. Like we discussed, we are going to get improved performance of parent transaction, because complex operations we are going to deviate to a child transaction. And you might have seen, when you have very complex operations, you might be getting apex CPU timeout issue. So that can be also solved using this approach, and you will be able to avoid mixed DML exception, and you can call integrations from trigger. Bulk processing of data is another use case, and you are going to get additional set of governor elements like we discussed, and you have better control on recursive execution. I hope you are able to understand the different approaches by which you will be able to execute operations asynchronously. Thank you once again, and you can connect with me through LinkedIn or Twitter, and this is my blog post. Thank you once again, the Pack Dreaming organizing team, for having me as part of this wonderful event. Thank you.